So I'm here with Rod, and I first met Rod, it's almost a year ago now, in person at the Connecticut Estuary, Connectuary. We never coined that name because Midwestuary was a much better name, and the Connecticut event. And I feel like Rod and I somewhat monopolized the conversation. So the first thing I have to do is apologize to everyone else that was at the Connecticut event and didn't have enough time to talk in the broader group sessions because Rod and I had a lot of fun going back and forth about things. And I invited Rod. I got to make sure I don't say Ron. I invited Rod to talk for a few reasons. Number one is I like you. Like I genuinely, I really like you. Number two
Thanks,
is
Neal.
I mentioned this before we started recording, but I feel like the as the corner matures, we've gotten somewhat provincial and tend to circle around the same topics over and over and over again, which are really interesting and deep topics, but we tend to hit them from the same angles. And I have other interests and angles in how I think about those topics, like the psychological, the economic, and I think some of those you share with me. And I think we have the capacity potentially of exploring those the topics that the corner typically covers, but other topics and looking at them from those angles. But I'm also genuinely interested in your perspective of the current moment of the zeitgeist in a number of ways, and that's sort of where I want to take the conversation towards the end. But in the beginning, I figured we could start with entrepreneurship and work our
Could
way
I
there.
could I
Yeah.
before we jump right in, I was
Mhm.
I was doing a little bit of house cleaning and I books stacked everywhere and I was just trying to like which ones am I going to give away? And I found this book. It's a collection of poems from Leonard Cohen, but the title, Let Us Compare Mythologies. I'm like, well, that's kind of like the TLC. It's like, it's like seemed apropos of what we do around here.
Stay a
Oh,
while and
oh,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
I have something else here. Actually, this is a little surprise, little show and tell. I don't think you can see it in the camera, but I'll hold it up here. So my wife owns an art gallery, and so all kinds of fun artists come through, and this was just so ridiculous and too awesome, and it wasn't very expensive, so I had to get it. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, but can you see
Uh-huh.
the image at least? All right,
Yeah,
I'll read the caption.
sure.
So it's just basically, it's a sketch pad. It's just torn out of a sketch pad. So we framed it. Listen, kid, Jesus died so you wouldn't have any more questions like that. That also made me think of the TLC. Anyway, just hopefully a little
Levity.
leavening. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, entrepreneurship.
Yeah, the first topic I threw at you over email was in is entrepreneurship on a downward trend? And maybe I can lay out some initial thoughts I had on this and just to kind of sketch the landscape. I was thinking, what are the minimum necessary requirements for entrepreneurship? Like the minimum, yeah, like I'm an IT guy and you have like the minimum system requirements in order to get something off the ground. And I was thinking there's at least two and maybe three. So one is a vision of what could be or an original idea, seeing that something's missing. There has to be something imaginal that's not yet formed that you see as a possibility. And then the second has to be some sort of self-discipline, like some sort of self-ignition, inward out versus like someone telling me what I should do. And then the third one, which I think is more optional, is networking, like plugging into the people and resources that are actually needed depending on whatever the project is. And I see all three of those as not trending or not having been trending in the right direction. Part of it is that my generation and younger, I think I was at the very early stage of this. But before my generation, if you were a tinkerer, someone who liked figuring stuff out, you would go into your garage or you would scrounge up some materials somewhere and at the local electronics shop or something, and you would start tinkering, like physical tinkering in your garage. And post my generation, the internet was just too tempting. And it was just too, it's like why bother tinkering or creating a laboratory yourself or trying something yourself if you can do it in a virtual space at 1/10 or 1/100th the cost and the time. And it was a far more efficient way to go about it. So I grew up in the town of Edison, New Jersey, which is named after Thomas Alva Edison, Wizard of Menlo Park. Yeah. And I remember the mythology of
So why
Thomas Edison.
so
Yeah.
why is Edison's museum in Detroit?
There's definitely a museum in Edison, but
Like like they recreated the whole campus in Detroit at the Ford Museum. It's weird. It should be in New Jersey. Anyway, go on.
yeah. Um, that's a good question. Yeah. So within video games, there's this concept called a tech tree, where you have to discover different tech. So let's say you're playing a first person shooter. So you get this technology for your weapon or this, and you climb the tree. Or if you're playing Civilization, you're running the civilization. First, you discover animal husbandry, and then you discover the wheel and pottery and writing, and you work your way up. And so one part of me looks at the current generation and thinks like, man, they've just been seduced into the electronic rather than the physical, and the virtual rather than the physical, or the easy versus the difficult. I think there's some of that. But another part of me is like, maybe maybe we've picked all the low-hanging fruit. Like that scene, I go back to the scene a lot, but the scene in the Truman Show where what's his face? Jim Carrey stands up and he's like, I want to be an explorer. And the teacher pulls down the map and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, there's nothing left to explore. It's like maybe the 300 or 400 years post Enlightenment, like all the low-hanging fruit has been picked. And yeah, so thoughts on that?
It's not polite as the host of the show to invite somebody on and then just take away all their talking points immediately. I just, it's like that's what I was going to say. um, I'm kidding. But not. I mean, I'm kidding about the not polite part. So when you emailed me and that was the first topic, I immediately had some thoughts, and they will rhyme anyway with what you were saying. Um, it's probably almost 20 years ago now. I read a book. This is back when I used to read books before my attention span was hijacked to the point where I can't even finish a book anymore, which is just wild. And it was called, I think it was about Gatling, the gun guy. I think it was called Mr. Gatling's uh, Terrible Marvel or something like that. And it was, ostensibly it was about this invention, right? And his motivations, and obviously it didn't go the way he hoped. He thought he was going to basically end warfare. Um, but you know how sometimes you get something out of a book that's actually kind of tangential to the point of the book. And in setting the scene for understanding this man, the author, she she kind of painted a picture of the 19th century in America where everybody was doing this. He actually had other inventions prior to that, right? And so, kind of to your point, you can go back 100 years, and you can find every barn, basement, shed. Probably not a lot of garages back then. maybe where they kept the horses, carriage house. You'd find guys tinkering because they were going to invent the next thing. And there was this massive explosion of innovation, patents, get rich. Like there was all these stories of people, building fortunes from just some simple idea. And so she's in telling the story, she's setting the scene for where the hero of this story, the kind of environment that he emerges from, right? And I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I actually saw that because my grandfather was, well, first of all, he was one of these perpetual motion guys. Like he was an inventor, and he worked for, well, White Machine Works, which is, that's the connection to Whitesville, Massachusetts. That was the big textile mill in Massachusetts. And he had a number of patents in his name, spindles, like improvements, things like that in terms of the textile process. And he had invented a like a simple little device, a lot of oil heat in houses in New England, and so big tank in the basement, and the guy would come from the outside and he'd fill it up, right? But you didn't know how full it was, so he had just invented this little kind of bobber thing that just showed how close to empty you were, so that one, you would know when you're going to run out, and two, you wouldn't overfill it, right? And so he was like selling these things, right? And he was convinced that perpetual motion was possible, and so his basement was full of all of the like wheels of all different sizes with like ball bearings and grooves in the spokes, like. And my father was an engineer, and so they always had this like this friction, because my dad thought the whole thing was BS. My grandfather was convinced, right? He was more of a dreamer, but my dad was more practical, right? So I grew up, we would occasionally, we live in California, but we would visit occasionally. And so this was like this kind of place of wonderment, like all these wheels and all these tools and, just right. And then my father was equally handy. So I spent most of my childhood where all the other kids were like skateboarding, surfing, like having fun. Like I was in the shop handing tools to my dad, right? So, like, yeah, of course I hated it as a kid. Now, like, I'm actually pretty handy, right? I can fix most things, right? So that same ethos kind of extended to the next generation. Even though I'm growing up in Southern California, on a Saturday, I'm probably under the house in the crawl space, laying on my back while he's soldering new copper tubing for the plumbing in the house or whatever, right? So of course, at the time, this was not the cool thing to be doing. All the other kids were having fun, and I was just helping my dad. But as a result, I learned to make furniture and like all these things that I learned as a result of those experiences. And my brother and I, we would go to Radio Shack and like buy these little like in the back of magazines like Popular Electronics or whatever, they'd have these little schematic diagrams, and they would like lay out, you could get these resistors and capacitors, and we can make little noisemakers, little flashing lights, stuff like that. And so we just geek out making little, just dumb little devices. We had a ham radio receiver, so we could like tune into the like ham radio things. This is the 70s, right? And so we were just used to being able to take something apart. Transistor radios, of course, were around by then. And you just take little screws apart and you could figure it out, right? And put it back together. Hopefully, you didn't have any extra parts. So I grew up kind of bathed in that culture, even though a lot of the kids around me were not necessarily in that culture, right? And so when I first started, like I noticed the iPhone, or actually, yeah, before the iPhone, the iPod, right? Remember that?
Maybe
And so
2000. I mean, that was the thing that bounced Apple back because before that, I mean, Apple was in the doldrums when they rehired Jobs back, and it
yeah,
was yeah, it was the iPod that launched him.
and I remember telling my friends, so this is at least 20 years ago, I'm like, you can't do what we did as a kid. Like go ahead, take it apart. It will never work again. Right? Or of course now iPhones and things like that. So I was starting 20 years ago, I was starting to just say to all my friends, like, what are all the like the kind of nerdy, you know, just the people who like to take things apart, figure out how they work. I think robotics kind of offered that, right? So this is not a perfect analog to entrepreneurship, but the fact that you started where you did is exactly where I would start if I was thinking about, okay, so how do you even get the impulse, the inclination? Where does that even come from? But thinking like, oh, I could actually take this apart. I think producing music, for example, might be a great, for some people that's a great avenue of, because you can in 30 minutes you can be good at Fruity Loops, but it can take you 30 years to master music production, things like that. This is obviously not exclusive to boys and men, but skews heavily toward boys and men in terms of their interests, right? So I started to worry about where would you learn to just, fidget gadgets, take things apart, right? And to your larger point about entrepreneurship, I mean, I would even distill your little list down even more. The rule I use basically for any idea that's worth my time anyway is that should exist, right? So you think of something, it's like, well, that should exist, and why doesn't it, right? And you'll find yourself saying, why doesn't that exist, right? So that's kind of my rule is just
Or
go ahead.
there's one other possibility, and I could be wrong about this, but what if it's something that there's supporting evidence that you're better at it than everybody else?
Well, the the only thing I'm a little uh, cautious about is the kind of lofty heights of entrepreneurship that word has now taken on. I mean, now there's like whole curriculum around trying to create entrepreneurs and leadership and uh, my so it's what you're saying is not wrong, right? It's just that it might make it a bit precious. You may actually only be average at whatever it is that you think, whatever skill or experience is going to be required. But if you're the person who thinks it's worth doing, then you might be the only one to do it, right? So, I, I sure it helps, right? It helps if you have a particular skill set or aptitude or something like that. You might be alluding to those sort of three concentric circles. You like the one thing that you'd be could be best at in the world, the thing that you have a real passion for, and the thing that there would actually be a market for that people would actually pay for, right? Um, Something like
Yeah,
that.
I like Warren Buffett's concept of a moat, if you're familiar with that.
Oh
Like
yeah,
something that separates you from your competition in some way, shape, or form.
I that starts to sound a lot more sinister to me now than it did when I first encountered it back in the '90s, reading Buffett for the first time. Because back then that was like a newspaper or railroads, or
Yeah. But
now
now it's a
it's like,
closed ecosystem where no one can actually integrate with your software in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
yeah, that's now it's zero. What is it, 0 to 1 with Teal? Like, basically don't even bother investing in things where you don't have a realistic chance of a monopoly. It's like, wait a minute, like, I'm not sure that's
Yeah.
what the original idea of capitalism was.
Well, eventually I want to talk about that in terms of the where that leads to, because eventually, we're in a new Gilded Age in many ways, and let's not go there yet. But let's stay on
By the way,
entrepreneurship.
we just some friend of mine turned me on to that about 2 months ago. So
Yeah.
my wife and I have been binging on that, and then we just ran out of episodes. Like, what we thought there was, like, we were just going to get to watch the whole thing. It's like, no, actually now we're waiting like everybody else for the next episode. Good show.
I haven't seen it. I
Oh,
said yeah, I only
I
said Gilded
recommend it.
Age because I know that's what it's called.
I
It's the
recommend it. It's a good
okay.
show. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's on, I don't know, HBO or something. It's good.
Okay. Well, I'll write it down.
It's produced. It's the same guy who did Downton Abbey, and don't hold that against it.
Cool. Yeah. So all right. So what do you think has changed from your generation to mine in that 20-year period? Is it just a hijacking of the virtual, or is there more to it than that?
Well, let's start where we started, which is solid state electronics and things like that, right?
Yeah.
That think of pretty much every guy. I don't At your age, did any of your teenage guy friends still know how to, like, adjust a carburetor in a car, change the spark plugs?
All the guys doing that were like blue collar, rough around the edges. We're not my people.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were the Star Trek nerds.
Yeah, there would have been a point, and I don't know exactly where the crossover is, where any self-respecting young man would know how to do the basics, like change the tires, replace the spark plugs and change the oil, things like that. Rotate the tires in your driveway. Like, I, you know, I'm sure the elites weren't doing that, but just normal middle class people would still know how to do that. I don't know exactly when that changed because, as I said, I kind of grew up a little weird, right? Like, my dad was, like, very principled about stuff like that and didn't see the point in spending money on things if you could do it yourself, right? He's a typical engineer, and so I got exposed to it. So it was already happening in the '70s, at least in Southern California, right? Now, I wasn't growing up in farm country or something, so a lot of what I'm describing may have come later for other parts of the country. So one level analysis would just be that as things became more and more complex, you needed much more sophisticated understanding, sometimes instruments and machines, and right. So you take your car and now good luck. You can't do anything on your car practically.
Well, my father would have said comparative advantage. I don't want to spend my time doing something I don't enjoy doing, and I have the money to pay someone who can do it faster, more efficiently than I can.
We
So,
all got, yeah, we all got that in Econ 101, and it's not wrong. It's given us the abundance we have, but we might have unwittingly, and I think maybe this is what you're, where you're going with this.
Yeah, exactly.
This is why I picked up, like I'm sure I'll talk to you about that because I got some thoughts about that too. Um, it's not wrong, like iPhones are great, but we might have unwittingly been kicking out all the rungs of the ladders. And I know you're interested in talking about AI too, and like just take everything we're saying right now and just accelerate it to infinity. Um, it when you That's why I said what I did. I read that book. I'm like, oh, like there was a whole culture around innovation, right? And
It
you
was
know,
almost a masculine competition in that, I bet, between
yeah,
people like Edison and Tesla. Now, it wasn't always fair, or it was kind of a street fight, is my understanding at certain times.
oh yeah.
But even at a
Edison
local
was
level, I bet that's true. Sorry, go
Edison
ahead.
was not a cuddly guy. Anybody who, whatever opinions you might have about the current Edison, go back and read about Edison. You'll you'll see this is not the first time we've had people like this um, who are just master innovators who have personalities you wouldn't necessarily want in your next door neighbor. So one level of analysis would be that it would just be the technology has gotten increasingly complicated, and um, so the gadgeteer, the hobbyist, really can't dabble, and so now we're going to let you dabble, with your video games or whatever, right? That's, I would say, one level of analysis, and I think it's true, right? I think that's just an inevitable outcome, and we may have the comparative advantage argument is a pretty good argument, and we don't all need to be auto mechanics or whatever, right? Um, the I I don't know how you can talk about this without talking about something like late stage capitalism, right? Um, if you just kind of run the experiment all the way to its end, maybe this is where you end up, right? If 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 you're making a cold economic efficiency argument around something like being able to repair your own car, grow your own food, or whatever, then this is where you end up, right? And you lose that argument every time if you're on the other side of it. Just like the Luddites, have become essentially a punchline for the last 200 years around technological advancement. Well, maybe we just got the time scales wrong. maybe they were right all along. Yeah, who knows? Um, so it it does make it harder to be an entrepreneur in the kind of small e version that I'm advocating for, right? I'm not talking about the startup that becomes the next unicorn kind of entrepreneur. I'm saying you see a problem in your local community that you think you might be able to solve, and people will pay you to do it. And now you have a company and a business, and you have your independence, right? Which, of course, is going to be my focus. That's the main reason why I'm such a big fan of entrepreneurship, is because it um, it cultivates all of these generalist skills and abilities and aptitudes that I think end up having all kinds of other applications, and give you a kind of stance in life that makes you a lot more resilient. Um, to me, the idea that my ability to keep a roof over my head, support my family, etc., depends on whether or not the the boss that I just got because there's been a corporate merger likes me or not. The idea that my livelihood is so dependent on something as ephemeral as whether or not I'm kind of on the right side of whatever is happening in some corporate environment. It's just, I mean, that just terrifies me. I can't even imagine, right? Yet obviously that's a lot of people's reality. So I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship, and I worry that it's getting harder and harder to take that path.
Do you? Oh, good. I'm unmuted. Do, so I've read Kurzweil and the Singularity, and that was my religion for, I would say, from the time I was maybe 20 to the time I was 30, 31, and well, no, I guess 32. and I had a religious experience. But I was a for a good chunk of my life, I was a transhumanist. Like that's how I thought of things. And I actually think that AI is a bubble. And I suspect our situation is more akin to like the agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago, where somebody, there are some major discoveries in terms of cultivating the land, and suddenly a tribe can stay situated. And the ability to stay situated next to a stable water source allows greater population growth, a greater consolidation of power, which leads to writing, currency, and everything that comes with what we consider civilization. Let's say the art and the ritual that bonds a people together. And so you have an explosion in around the Levant, I don't know, 8,000 years ago, something like that. It's not really an explosion because you have different things popping up at different times. But you have these epics. Is it epoch or epic? You have these periods of time throughout ancient history where things seem pretty stable, and then we have the Bronze Age, we have the Iron Age, we have and there's like a sudden technological innovation and a jump, and then of course that technology has to become generally ubiquitous everywhere, and it's still mostly economic power, but also stability of, let's say, a an empire that stabilizes something. But I suspect that what we're going through right now is very similar to the agricultural revolution in its scope and also in terms of changing the skill set in the human traits that become valuable. Like the skill set of the hunter-gatherer of before the agricultural revolution compared to the skill set of the scribe after the agricultural revolution is hugely night and day. It's like complete night and day. And I don't think we know yet what the skill set is that can't yet be automated by AI. But I have a sense that I don't know. I just suspect that AI is taking care of half the human brain. And this might be wishful thinking. This might be wishful thinking on my part. But I think AI is going to automate the heck out of everything that can be automated within the confines of things that are already thoroughly mapped and understood and propositional. And I think there's going to be this whole other aspect of human experience that's more, unless AI can hear, smell, taste, touch, and see. The problem with AI is it cannot discern quality in the moment because we are quality detectors in everything we do. Every little motion that I make, I am recalibrating the quality of that. Every single thing I say, we are constantly recursively analyzing everything we do. And my sense of AI is that it can produce two or three outcomes, and it has no basis for judging the quality of those outcomes relative other than like measuring that against a data set itself. Whatever's inherent about the human condition to recognize beauty, independent of social construction, or whatever is inherent to the human condition to recognize quality. We have something there that's inherent that the AI doesn't have. And I think that will be a limiting factor. And I think that will be the last end of our technological progress of this epic. That's a lot. Thoughts?
I basically agree with you, although it doesn't really speak to what I think is much more my primary concern, which is what does that have to do with work, right? Because
Mm.
you're of course you're right. There's a whole lot of other things that AI won't be able to do, like be constipated or horny or any number of things, right? Like there's a lot to being human that it can't be reduced to an algorithm or anything mechanistic. My I've mentioned this. I don't know if I've mentioned this around the TLC or not, but I don't know where I picked this up, but somebody said it on a podcast somewhere, and as soon as I heard it, like, oh, that's very important. We have the Turing test. It was actually called something else originally. It was a white paper he issued, I think, in 1952. I looked it up, and he sets this we'll call it a threshold, a bar. It's like the 4 minute mile. It's like when artificial intelligence can fool most humans thinking it's human, then now we have artificial intelligence. That's the standard. And then for the next whatever 70 years, how many millions and how many bright minds and just all of the efforts that went into hitting that target, right? And then we just blew right by it and like hardly noticed it, right? Like it happened so quickly. It's like, oh well, never mind about that. And no one ever stopped. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I didn't hear anybody. I'm sure that if you're in the right rooms, I'm sure it probably came up. But did anybody ever stop to ask for all those years leading up to it, or now since, why were we so preoccupied with trying to have it be able to fool us into thinking it's us? Like, if you talk to your Siri, you don't. I mean, it's a device, right? Like the 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 issue of language and intelligibility and all that kind of stuff. Like, sure, you have various devices that do stuff, and being able to communicate them, through voice is convenient, right? You don't have to be typing and stuff. There's lots of ways that tools we do use tools and we have become accustomed to using tools. But why should it be able to fool us into thinking it's not, that it's human, right? That there's something underneath that question that I think is actually quite profound. And it speaks, I think, to the issues that you've raised, which is like, well, clearly it can't be that, right? In other words, it can't actually be human. So why would we want to make it so that it could fool us into thinking it is? That's just an
Oh,
interesting question.
I have an answer. If you probably won't like it, but I think it's related to the egalitarian impulse. And what I mean by that is what separates someone who's wealthy from someone who's not is their capacity to secure time and attention from other people and resources, but mostly other people. And so if if AI is equally good, equally effective, equally, capable of doing whatever I want to anyone, then theoretically that would be an egalitarian, democratizing, flattening of human expertise and the necessity of, let's say, wealth and connection to reach certain outcomes. Because then I can just get it instantly instead of the best lawyer in the world who can only be hired once by one person at one time for one case or probably multiple cases. But you get my point. I can have that level of law applied universally to all, equally under the law, egalitarian, utopia, go.
It wouldn't need to be able to fool me into thinking it was human to do that. You're right. Of course, that's knowledge, information, expertise, processes. I mean, right? All agreed. But I wouldn't need to believe that I was talking to a human in order to
Oh,
accomplish that.
no, you would, because what if half of the effect of all psychological intervention or psychotherapy, whatever, what if half the effect is your belief that it will work? And what if half of that effect is then, oh, I'm talking to the AI God that is smarter than any psychologist, so it's obviously right and it's going to help me and cure me and heal me.
Well,
Um,
I could see that. Yeah, that's a sinister dystopian idea, but it's not. I see it. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're attempting to answer my rhetorical question with an actual answer.
yes.
I think there's more to it than that, but that's an answer. um, the thing I'm much more worried about is, and you alluded to it in your email. I think the way you put it is it going to advantage experienced workers, and I would say it's going to advantage high agency people.
Yeah.
We already have a world of increasing inequality. We have that book, The Big Sort. People are increasingly sorting each other, avoiding people you don't want to have to deal with in all sorts of ways. Our economy has already facilitated that to a great degree. And now AI comes along and becomes just this superpower for people who know how to wield it. And, you know, I don't really use it very much, but I played with it. Unlike many of my friends, I'm not obsessed with it. It just isn't that interesting. It's a gadget for me, like whatever. I'm just not enthralled the way a lot of people I know are. But I can instantly see its implications for something like work, knowledge work in particular. I Googled not too long ago what percentage, I asked Gemini actually, what percentage of the US labor force is considered knowledge work. and it was 76%. So like I'm much more worried about this, right? Because at least we have deluded ourselves into thinking that what makes us uniquely human is our capacity to reason and to think and to and it's accumulating knowledge and knowing how to apply it in the right situations and all these things, right? And so it, every other tool we have had has not been doing that, right? And suddenly we have a thing that's designed to do that. And so then, and this may lead to where you were taking it, which is like, okay, well, we've essentially relegated all of those kind of things to a machine. So what do we have left? Well, we have the things that make us uniquely human, music and art and all the other things, right? And you know, sure, maybe.
Well, there's a problem with that. And so this is something that came to me somewhat of an epiphany. It's like what is this hyper focus on identity over the last 15 years or so? And the hyper focus on identity because the historical view of identity is based on the value that you are adding in whatever relationship or whatever body that you're part of. You are the shaman of the tribe because you're adding value as the shaman of the tribe, or you are a husband and you're a father and you're this and you're that. So that's where identity came from. It's inward out. It's towards the value that you're adding. Whereas the new identity is see me this way, treat me this way. I get this. So it reverses the polarity and it says like I'm defining myself based on what I'm receiving from others or how I'm being perceived by others. Um, and I don't see that problem going away for the same reason that you just mentioned, which is if it becomes increasingly difficult to cultivate a skill set in which you are able to add value to other people, the predilection or the predisposition is to define yourself based on what you have or what you're receiving based on what you're giving.
Yeah, and I, in in thinking about our conversation, there was a there's an aspect we kind of skipped from the sort of the the origins of the issue of fading entrepreneurship, and now we're in the very deep weeds of AI. And I'm happy to stay in the weeds here with you, but we did skip a step, and I've alluded to it a little bit with I use the term late stage capitalism. It's a somewhat loaded term. It might imply things about my political beliefs that actually aren't true. I'm a free marketeer. I'm recognizing the problem. Like I'm like you know we we all took those. We probably all took the same courses, and I kind of bought it too. And now I'm like, there is a kind of internal logic to this free market capitalism, particularly the version that we have, which ends up in some kind of scary places. And a step that I think is a bridging step between some guy in his garage with an idea and now how is AI going to be deployed, and what kind of wreckage is it going to create across the labor force. There's an interim step here, which is the private equity markets, and I think it's important to call out. So I had my 6 month dentist appointment today, and I noticed that since the last time they're like scheduling thing and like the little reminders, they keep pecking you with texts and stuff, right? And I noticed that there was like a new name on the email I was getting. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So when the dentist comes in at the end to kind of do the final review, I said, yeah, I noticed you have some kind of different kind of software. Like, has there been a change? I, is there a venture capital firm involved? And he kind of his answer could have been just a sincere answer, but it was kind of hand wavy. Yeah, we're working with a management firm that's helping us with all the back office stuff, blah, 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 right? And I'm like, oh, I bet you got to roll up. I bet you're part of this massive trend that's happening all over in almost every industry. And little by little, just your neighborhood, anything from HVAC to funeral homes to dentists to architectural firms, like you name it, there's a private equity backed thing happening where they're often specializing in various sectors. And you know, it's kind of like when the farmer sold the farm to the developer instead of keep it in the family. You kind of can't blame people who built their businesses for all these years and are looking, you know, many times their kids don't want it and they're looking for an off ramp, and someone comes along and gives them like a 3 year earn out, you know, and they can keep working for a while and they can, you know, monetize the value of what they built. And then someone just kind of slides in and just all of a sudden they're suggesting those x-rays maybe a little more often. They're, you know, they're finding ways to just optimize the present value of all those future revenue streams. And this is happening everywhere and it's eating away at, and so I, you know, if the right way to talk about this is to start with an Edison and end up with, you know, unfettered AI, I think there's an interim step here, which has created the conditions where there just aren't a lot of people left standing who are, you know, captains of their own ship, so to speak, right? And so I meant to kind of bridge that, you know, before we got in too deep into the question of AI, but
You're
it
making
just
an excellent case for Paul Kingsnorth's The Machine. I don't know if you're
yeah,
intending to do that, but
no, well, that's
because
the thing, like,
the way I see The Machine is it's this separation of the agency of individual people and those who are um, reaping the results of those people,
right.
or the separation of labor from there's a term for that. I forget the official term.
Well, I'm fully aware of the implications of what I'm saying, or I differ from someone like Kingsnorth. First of all, it's I'm not an author and I'm not an intellectual, and I don't need to, you know, sell books or whatever. I'm fully aware of the implications of it. I, you know, even he will admit he doesn't really know what to recommend, right? So I'm much more saying, okay, well, that's pretty dystopian sounding. Now what? Like, what do we do? And I'm just immediately thinking about, well, what would I do if I was 20 years younger? You know, what am I doing myself, right? How am I sort of trying to be in the world in a way that I feel is pro-social and is building a better future, is with, you know, with to the degree that I can, right? Um, but so I'm not a Paul Kingsnorth in the sense that I'm not a doomer, right? Because to the point you made, I think there is something unique and miraculous and divine about what it is to be a human, right? And so I'm, you know, in that sense, I'm very pro-human, right? Um,
Maybe
and
even pro-divine.
maybe, um, it, and you made a you haven't gone back to it yet, but you made a point about AI as being a bubble, and I'm similarly bearish on the long term prospects of it. Like this massive infrastructure investment, like these just this it reminds me of broadband
It
in
reminds me of 99.
exactly
It's 1999
all over
prior
again.
to
Yeah,
.com.
it's exactly how it feels to me, particularly in
Well,
the broadband area, particularly
can I give
because
you analogy? Okay. In 1998, 1999, the way I would get on the internet is you had net zero, and net zero was actually free. And the way net zero was free is you would get a mandatory ad box that, so I would hijack my parents' phone line. So I was 13 in 98, hijack my parents' phone line. And what I wanted to do on the internet mainly is play video games with my friends online because it was the first time you could be in a virtual world on another planet where aliens, you have like a 2v2 or 3v3, and it's a team deathmatch where you're commanding your troops and aliens and all this fun stuff. And this was before any sort of voice over internet or anything. So I learned to type fast from these games because the only way to communicate was very fast. Okay. So at 13, we get free net zero. We have an ad box. Of course, a 13-year-old can hack the ad box, figure out, download a crack for the ad box that hides it. So you can play the video game with free internet. Ad box is not popping up, not an issue. And and that didn't last because obviously the internet couldn't be free. And now you go on Grok or ChatGPT, and how many ads do you have right now? For now, you have zero. How long is that gonna last? For now, you know? Because first we got to get everyone in and dependent.
well, the reason I mentioned the broadband thing is because, in a sense, a lot of the survivors of that era went on to create fabulous wealth, right? I remember when Google started, right? Like I'm I'm older than you, Neal. So but the broadband thing was massive amounts of infrastructure investment, right? Everybody was trying to it was a land rush basically. Everybody's trying to be there first, and there was just massive amounts of investment that went into that, and almost all of those either just straight up went bankrupt or got folded into something else. And so the whole internet was built on the back of that infrastructure, and almost all those people lost their shirts. And so to me, it's a better analogy to what we're seeing with the ramp up for AI now.
With the GPU data centers and
Yeah,
all that.
all of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're probably going to discover really quickly that, oh, actually, there's a way you can just run this thing on on your desktop device. The way
And it
these.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And it
No,
gets you
go.
95% of the power with like, or
Exactly.
95% of the efficacy with like 2% of the power. Yeah.
And most, after we've all scratched that itch enough where it's like, oh, it can do anything, what we're actually going to find out is no, we actually just want these agents that'll do very specific things. And that's, again, my worry is that that's actually what most work looks like. It's fairly routinized. Like there's things you do throughout the course of a typical week, and a lot of that is pretty routine. And an agent can watch you for a week and can do it forever, right? And it doesn't get tired, and it knows that it basically has access to all of human knowledge when it's turned on, right? And one way to think about what work even is human beings creating problems for other human beings to solve, right? We kind of have this. It's an invisible covert social construct, which is, it still essentially derives from this mythical medieval village that I'm always talking about, where yeah, everybody had to be doing something, and you couldn't really be off in the corner studying Socrates, right? You better know how to hunt or fish or something, fight, build, and so in this kind of interdependent way, everybody's contributing to this little mythical village that probably never existed the way I have it in my head. But what we think of as work has increasingly been abstracted to the point where now we just make stuff up to do. And we all kind of agree that somebody should do that, because on the other side of that is someone who's going to get that email and that report and then do something with that report. And you're going to call a meeting and have a staff meeting, and you're going to discuss and you're going to make decisions. Like, so much of what goes on that we consider work is really just this thing that's operating under the surface, where we've all just agreed that you got to be doing something, I got to be doing something. So let's not dig too deep about whether or not we actually need to do what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And my worry is that AI just pulls the mask off of all of that.
I love this. I love this. Let's get into this. Let's talk because I think we need to get into what is the nature of work because I hear you wholeheartedly in terms of what you're saying. Like if the nature of work is simply to improve the efficiency of systems at its best, whatever that is. Um,
That's pretty anti-human.
and then you get to the point of diminishing marginal returns, which I think we're now at. I mean, we're seeing things like the life expectancy for the first time come down because let's say the technological innovations of healthcare are not exceeding the nature of the system as such to promote healthy people, whatever healthy people are. So okay, so I wrote down okay, there are really two types of work as I see it. Like two types of real like brass tacks, like what's the point of human work? And one is the most important probably is nurturing, perpetuating the next generation. That's it. That's number one. And then number two is like the defense of that system, whatever it is that's nurturing or perpetuating the next generation. But then it does get back to, I don't know how much you watch the Ezra Klein, Ross Dalfat.
Watch it.
I can never
Yeah,
pronounce. Okay. But Ross's question of like, how then shall we live? And I think we are at the point of like 100,000 microcosm virtual cultures that are playing with that. How now shall we live? But maybe not. Like maybe we're still in a feudal techno gilded age. and feudal as in Feudal as opposed to maybe the other
Futile.
one too. But yeah. Um, so like, yeah. So first of all, do you agree with me on the fundamentals of work? Like, what is it that we're actually trying to do?
Well, I would say that's something more like a telos or a kind of because there are more reasons to work than those. Even though I agree with you, they're
Oh, sure.
the most important, right? But they're not the only thing that's important. So there's all kinds of good reasons to work. And we're going to be generalizing and oversimplifying right and left here, so we'll give each other a break on that because I am too, right? I'm like, well, I'm basically describing all these paper pushers in corporate America, like nobody's doing anything of any value. That's of course not true either, right? And there's lots of real work, that if your plumbing is plugged up, like you need somebody to come fix it, so there's lots of real value that's being done out there, obviously caregivers and all sorts of things, right? So I am creating a bit of a straw man when I'm talking about a particular. It's basically the information technology world, right? Um, but rather than take so, I mean, I could expand on what I think work is. To me, it's more interesting to just stop and think about it, right? Because there's all kinds of ways you could think about what is work actually, right? I tend to think about it as value, right? So because value is more ephemeral, and as long as you and I both agree that something is valuable, then it can be valuable, right? So it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be
I,
survival, right?
one of the things that makes me convinced that God exists is comparative advantage. This economic truth that's on you cannot you basically can't deconstruct this
That's quite a
of
statement.
the seriously
you're
comparative
you're
advantage is miraculous.
you're
It's
enshrining comparative advantage in the canon. Like, I mean, I tend to agree with you. It's pretty powerful.
or the fact that knowledge or wisdom conveyed, I lose nothing by conveying it. I guess I lose nothing by conveying foolishness also. That's kind of a miracle. But the reason comparative advantage is so miraculous, and I'm saying this mainly for the people watching and not for you, is that the world of economics is not a zero sum game. Like it's not something where Rod gets and I lose, or it's um, through the multiplication of difference between people in terms of talents, abilities, capital, all that, you get an overall richer pie. And it's miraculous. Like the classic example is bacon and eggs, where if even if you're better at making both bacon and eggs, if Rod can make 10 eggs and 5 bacon, and I can only make 1 egg and 1 bacon in the same amount of time, it's still better that we trade. And I should make all bacon, and Rod should make some bacon and all eggs, and then we'll trade. And that's a miracle. It's a miracle.
You might have
Because
detected a note of skepticism on my part when the
okay,
subject of comparative advantages come up,
yeah,
a few times in this conversation. Because you know, I, I get it. Like I'm basically on board. You and I are living in the world that comparative advantage has created, and it's a pretty miraculous world. However, I'm I have concerns, right? Because I read the textbooks too. I got the lectures too. I get it. It's it's a it's beautiful and it's kind of elegance and simplicity. Um, I have worries that we are running up against the end of that logic,
yeah,
and that's what I'm getting at. So that's why I'm not sure it's divine. um, it. Let me give you an example. So on the subject of AI, so I've started a lot of things in my life, a lot of companies, and I've written a lot of copy. I've created websites. Like I've sat down and like agonized over like getting the wording just right on a web page or a brochure or whatever, right? And consider myself something of a writer, so I put a lot of effort into getting you can just hire some copywriter, but I could do it better. So a lot of times I would do it myself. And over the years, I started to realize like nobody's going to read this. Nobody, right? Like it's pretty. And so basically, by the time you reach 2025, if you go to a website, what you expect is some pictures, some graphics, maybe a nice logo, and some words. And maybe you'll read like the bullet headings, maybe, right? And then you're gonna click, 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 click. You're gonna see like about us, the team. You're gonna right, maybe, right,
Yeah. For 2 minutes, maybe.
maybe, right. And what I learned is the only people who are reading what you write are your competitors or people who are out to get you. Like no one else is actually reading this, right? Like nobody who's on your side is reading it, going like, "Wow, Rob, that's a beautiful piece of prose you
I don't
just
feel
wrote."
that way about TLC, by the way. The only people that watch this are people who, yeah, anyway, go ahead.
I'm going somewhere with this, right? So I started to have this realization. Business plan, same thing. It's like, they read the executive summary, they flip to the back to see who the people are or who the lead investor is. And it's like, yeah, whatever. They know all your graphs are BS anyway, so they don't, right? And so I just started noticing. I've been noticing this for a long time, and so I'll often tell people in that world, like, don't worry too much about it. Just make the pictures pretty, nice colors, nice. Don't worry too much about it, right? And now, so not too long ago, my wife and I were getting ready to go for our usual evening walk, and we bumped into this young. We live near a university, and so a lot of students around here, and we bumped into this. And Anne has a beautiful garden in the front, and so she was admiring the flowers. So we stopped and chatted for a minute. She's like, "Oh, it's so beautiful." Like, "Oh, what do you do?" And she's, "Oh, I'm a." I said, "Are you a student here?" She's like, "No, I graduated from it, but now I work as a copywriter for a woman's fashion company of some kind." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" So of course I have questions, and I'm gentle with her, but I'm like, "So do you use ChatGPT?" Right? She's like, "Oh yeah, 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 I use it all the time." And so I just went a little further with it, and I didn't say any more because we went on our walk, and I didn't want to alarm the poor young woman. But I'm like, well, first of all, nobody's reading what you write, right? Like, but of course I didn't say that. Second of all, you realize like AI can do that way better, right? And what I realized is as soon as we all acknowledge that the computer is writing all the copy, we're going to stop reading it.
What I think is going to happen. So I used to have to uh, travel a lot for my job, like 2 or 3 weeks of the year of the month, a lot. And the reason I needed to travel is because the social expectation, the social human norm was in order to do what I needed to do in a computer system, I needed to build relationships with the people that I was affecting. And the way to build relationships is you go in person and you present yourself and you're able to meet them and they know you're a real person and yada, yada, yada. Yes,
Pretend to like them, all that
correct.
stuff. Yeah.
COVID, what COVID did was break the societal expectation that in order to do that sort of work, that you needed to have a physical relationship. Now, the problem is that you actually still need to have the physical relationship when the situation is dicey, when you don't have consensus, when you have difficulties. It's much harder when the situation is difficult, it's much harder to figure it out remotely. But the problem is the situation is not difficult 99% of the time. So you fall into the pattern of like, yes, it's working, it's good, we can just keep going. And so what I suspect will happen is when we hit our next recession, and we could talk about that, when we hit our next recession, all the companies, and I think the companies are actually starting to figure this out. I actually think we're heading into a recession in the next year, but all the companies will have to figure it out, say like, what is the bare minimum that we need to keep the ship afloat? And the AI companies are going to be like, we got a great new product for you. You're going to float just fine. And voila. And there goes. So that's really what I'm concerned about in the near term, in terms of like, okay, if we have Great Depression level unemployment, like 25% level unemployment of people who really do want to work or have been working, what does that look like in an already fractured populace? Maybe this is not the direction that you want to take this conversation.
Well, I feel bad for people watching this conversation because I think you and I are probably having fun because we're just kind of geeking out and bopping from one thing to the next. And I mean, each one of the topics each one of those we could spend 2 hours talking about.
Yeah.
because um, they all each one does lead to the next, but each one is so rich that that it's um, it's tempting to just go right to the end and say, yeah, economic dystopianism, and um, I'm I'm not there. I am worried. Um, and I basically, by the way, agree with you that COVID was this kind of, a kind of apocalypse. It was a kind of a kairotic moment for a lot of things. Parents discovering what their children were learning in school, for example. It caused everybody to rethink what even education actually is. Is this a childhood we're trying to help form, or is this just a way to keep the kids busy so mom and dad can get back to the mines? There's a lot of things that COVID revealed. My sort of favorite of these is you're probably old enough to remember telecommuting. Remember that?
Yep.
That was the word in the '90s, in the aughts, and this was going to usher in this whole new world of telecommuting, right? And I was very interested in the subject at the time because if I have a kind of core foundational value system, it's something like that the family is the most irreducible unit of value there is, right? And so I was always very interested in the family farm as kind of a way of thinking about how value gets created by this. So not just value in the sort of esoteric sense of value, but I mean in the terms of market value, like economic value, industry, right? The idea that you're running a farm together and you have a division of labor and you're raising a family together and all that, right? And I was thinking about, this goes back to the '90s. I was thinking, telecommuting offers at least the potential for something like a digital recreation of the family farm. And now you have things like digital homesteading and things like this, right? Where you can earn your living out there, but you can be more based in real dirt, like a real community, right? And so this is something I've been very interested in a long time. And I remember it just didn't really take. Like, it talked about it a lot, talk, right? And a couple decades went by, but in I forget exactly when this was, but it would have been about two late aughts. There was a tanker truck accident in the Bay Area where it hit a bridge abutment and exploded, and there was this massive fire that burned for hours, and it just happened to be under multiple tiers of these spaghetti overpasses, right? Like, these. So there was like two or three overpasses above it, and so it melted them too. And it happened to be this crucial interchange to get to Oakland and other parts of the Bay, right? So it's like, I forget how many tens of thousands of cars passed over this particular location, and this happened on a Saturday. I think it was a Saturday night. So there's this panic. They had a name for it, like traffic palooza or something, or traffic apocalypse, or I forget. There was some. I'm sure you can Google and find out about it. But and I was watching this very carefully because it's like, right? So the local television stations are like, everybody stay home, right? But this is Silicon Valley, right? So they all had this technology to be able to work from home. Monday morning comes around, everyone's expecting this just absolute nightmare of traffic, and it's like way better than normal. There's way less traffic on the road. And so I remember telling all my friends at the time, this is what it is, right? Something's going to happen. Like, you look at a situation that's unsustainable. If you're sitting in traffic on the 405 in LA at any hour of the day and you're thinking like, well, this sucks. Like, why is anybody doing this? Well, then something happens that reveals, oh, you don't actually have to do this. And all of a sudden everything changes, right? And so I was talking that way. I'm like, telecommunicate, why hasn't this taken? Like, what? It seems so obviously better, right? For many types of jobs. And it just hasn't happened, right? So then that happened, and like, oh, well, all of Silicon Valley had always had the ability to do this, right? And so, like, okay, that's a tell, right? And then along comes COVID, and you know, I mean, I guess we can consider ourselves blessed that this technology was available, Skype and Zoom and so forth, right? And so the economy continued to march on, but it revealed something that I think you're pointing to, that actually we could have been doing this all along. So is there Of course, now we're trying to get everybody back to the office. Honestly, I think that's mostly a filtering mechanism, but whatever. Um, I've been remote for 25 years, so I I'm native to that, right? Um, to the other point you made about building relationships or sustaining relationships, my sense of this technology is it's great for for sustaining and thickening bonds that you have made.
Started in person.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, TLC would kind of defy that in the sense that they weren't necessarily started in person, I
Yep.
think, but there is definitely some kind of a
Some personal
yeah.
so think of it like 1900 Gilded Age, the titans, not of industry, but the titans of academics, of academia, in psychology, in medicine, in engineering, in this, and they're once every 5 years they're able to fly to Europe or fly to New York and they give their talk at the symposium and they build the relationship and then they're writing letters and maybe a telegraph, something like that the rest of the time, but they can still have a scientific community through their mutual interest and kinship, you could say, aim towards similar goals, but also some competition there. So I think you're right. It doesn't require a hard and fast like working in person all the time, but it does require some sort of network that keeps that spirit alive.
Well, in my opinion about all this is that it it contributes to the problem we talked about earlier, which is it further advantages high agency people. So if you are in some industry and your competitor, the number one salesperson in that competitor lives in Minneapolis, and they're it's near family and they've got aging parents and they're not going to move, but you can now basically set them up with a home office and get them like you right. It clearly advantages the recruitment of talent in a whole series of industries, right? And that's been my take on it. It's like, oh, I mean, it's for new entrants into almost any space. It gives you basically the world of talent um, to to deploy for whatever your business idea is. Of course, AI just takes all that and amplifies it. So, just in case we don't, I mean, we're just having a nice conversation here. Ostensibly, somebody might watch this. We're, some of them are going to be like, "Well, so wait a minute. Like, are we in favor of this or are we against it?" Right? This is the problem with something like remote work. It's like, well, I kind of like it if it means that husbands and wives can plan together about how they can put together a household budget that allows them to, become independent of the machine or to live somewhere where there's a little more land in a smaller town. Like we talked about this on the marriage crisis. I think one of the big moves that I'm sort of waiting to see happen is if it used to be go west, young man, well now it's like go to the middle. Like, there's all of these places where real estate is affordable, there's land is cheap, and the infrastructure is often still in place. The stoplights still work. The sewage still works, right?
But I gotta leave my friends, and I've gotta leave the vegan coffee place that I love so much, and all my
Yeah.
favorite delicacies and treats, and yeah.
Well, if we just make those places so ridiculously unaffordable that something breaks, right? And then that's when this starts to happen at scale.
Yeah, I said to Nick Free Brilliant. I don't know if you know who he is or
I know who it
follow
is.
him
Yeah,
on
yeah,
X. Yeah,
yeah.
because I'm not on X, and that's for my own psychological and social well-being. But I said to him that I think it's inevitable. It might be 30 years, but I think it's inevitable that at some point TLC has a permanent intermixture of people at a particular physical space. I think it's if the connections continue and strengthen, I think that's somewhat inevitable. I think it'll have some weaknesses if and when that happens because it's a lot harder to live with people than to talk with people over miles. And I'm not saying in the same house,
I
I'm
get
not
it.
saying
I get it.
that. But even in like trying to do the intentional community thing, like the communes failed with good reason. And even within Catholicism, it doesn't seem to be working. There don't seem to be enough adequate negative. Sorry, there do not seem to be yet the negative incentives. So talking about economics, negative incentives to not being around people that you trust with a high degree of personal trust, like a Dunbar number of personal trust. For the most part, we still have safety. We still have security. We still have the expectation that if I pull up to a McDonald's, they don't ask, who did you vote for in the last election before they serve me. We're not there yet. So, yeah. But go ahead.
Are you predicting that?
No, I don't think we're there yet. I think politically, I think I'm not as, I'm probably politically where you are economically, in that I'm not a doomer politically. In that I actually see the left somewhat giving up the fight. It's so weird. Like I think I worry more about Europe than I worry about the United States, and maybe I'm foolish for thinking that. I think what I worry the most about with the United States is Roman Republic becoming the Roman Empire, sort of thing, where the lack of trust at a local level leads to a greater degree of necessity of top-down control. And I see that being expressed most recently through the desire for some sort of digital ID. And that really worries me. Yeah.
Well, one way to think about all of this connectedness, I've postulated this before, but my kind of universal string theory of where we find ourselves starts with the camera. And then of course images and then prophilicity and connecting everybody with everybody else and everybody's got an opinion and right, all that. We could we're swimming in how terrible that can get, and maybe it can get more terrible. But there is a silver thread underneath that, which is something like a upleveling of the collective consciousness. And in a sense, one way to think about this is, I think I looked this up recently. The population of the globe, the whole world in 1900 was like 1 point, I think 1.2 or 1.6 billion. I think it was
Sounds
1.2. Yeah.
sounds about right. Yeah.
And now it's 8.2, I think. So in 125 years, we've added, what, you do the math, something like 7 billion people. And there's just like, think about how in every single way that's going to affect what it is to be a human being, right? Just the unbelievable complexity of that, right? And so, in a sense, you're going to need some way to recreate. I mean, we're herd animals, like we're basically village dwelling creatures, right? So, you're going to need something that makes the human experience sensible, intelligible, right? And so, of course, you're going to have tribalism, of course, right? All the things, right? But there's a potential redemptive idea here, which is that there is something unique and miraculous about being human, where we will actually find a way to reassert that as we see the fruits of what I'm calling late stage capitalism, AI, accelerationism, like all the things that just deprive us of all of our humanity. I could see a scenario where people are like, wait a minute, and if I'm going to make a prediction about the next big political movement, it's probably going to come from the left, and it's probably going to be anti-techno billionaire and AI. Uh,
Yeah.
the very people who basically um, created the current condition and made billions doing it, we now defer to as if they're the gurus that will lead us into the next stage, forgetting that they were in Silicon Valley in the 90s and aughts and made their billions. And now, of course, they have, a disproportionate voice. And so we're just going to cede all the territory to them. They're telling us here's the next thing. It's going to be AI. It's going to be amazing. Don't worry about it. It's going to be great. Right. And not that AI won't have all kinds of, things like, medical research and things. I mean, I'm sure there will be advantages to it. That's not my point. But if in so doing, we basically trade away the thing that makes us human, there's probably going to be a massive pushback there, right? And never mind dispossessed elites. I mean, there's so many, like, that's, I mean, this is another topic we could spend 2 hours talking about, right? But my intuition is that that's probably going to be the next, in the same way that NAFTA and outsourcing all of those manufacturing jobs and hollowing out all of these industrial cities was predictably going to create a political movement. We didn't know what to call it until it arrived, but of course it happened, right? In the same way that women, never before in the history of mankind have so many women, either by choice or by circumstances, never married or never had children. Like, well, of course that's going to have political implications in terms of the kind of tectonic plates shifting in terms of our political differences. Of course they're going to want more state intervention in sort of everyday life, right, to make them feel safe and all the things that they would care about. So this feels like the next most obvious political movement. Somebody's going to get ahead of that train and lead a political movement.
Yeah, it's something that has occurred to me is since about 2012, probably earlier, but definitely since 2012, the Democratic Party is in the United States has been the party of the working, or before 2012, party of the working class. Um, I was growing up in 90s, like Rage Against the Machine, all the anti-NAFTA stuff. Bill Clinton kind of changed that. Um, I think he was like pro NAFTA, pro globalism, kind of the cool kid, played the saxophone, all that stuff. Monica.
Neoliberal.
Yeah. And that I think opened the door to the left pivoting and saying, no, 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 what we care about is not class-based identity, but we care about these other categories more, the race and the sex-based identity. And I think that has run its course. It's gotten them nowhere. But there's also a tremendous amount of class-based resentment on the right. Tremendous amount. And I do worry about the pendulum swinging from the identity politics over to the much more traditional class-based resentment, both from the left and the right. And because Pareto, this is where we get into the new Gilded Age. Like, what would it mean in modern parlance to break up American Telecom and Telegraph, or break up Standard Oil, or break up? And can we afford to do that with China ascending and the geopolitical ramifications of a divided United States, where so much of our security as a nation is invested in these tech firm behemoths?
What a convenient foil. Like, you can't break us all up because we would become vulnerable to China.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know. Is that actually what China wants? I don't claim to know what China wants, but it sure would be a very convenient foil. Um, yeah, where do we go with this? Um, Prompt me, because I mean, I can.
Hmm. Well, I'll go back to my 20%, 30% unemployment. Like what does that look like?
Bad, very bad, and probably disproportionately affects elite employment. Probably disproportionately affects female employment. Um, it's Yeah, it's not good. It's a very worrisome thing. Um, and I keep waiting for. So I follow along. I pay close attention to what, particularly the optimists, the sort of the AI utopianists. I mean, the doomers are like, I get it. Like, I don't I don't actually have to dig that deep. I get it. Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm worried too. Kind of in a sense, it's almost too easy an argument to make, so I don't spend a lot of time on that because I don't want to fall into the same trap of pointing out how
Yeah.
terrible everything is. Um, but I listen very carefully to. I'm waiting for someone to say like, "Oh, actually, that would work." Like what I hear a lot of is like, "Don't worry, the Luddite said this too," and think of all the things that all the industries that now exist because that like we couldn't ever imagine blah blah blah, right? But my sense, anyway, of almost all of the technological advancements of the past were in response to an obvious need, right? Like they solved a problem, right? And it looks like this is solving the problem of labor costs are just too damn inconvenient to corporate profits, right? Like it's like the and I'm starting to sound like a left leaning person. I'm really not actually, but I'm sympathetic to this argument that what exactly are we gaining, right? So I mentioned New England, where my family's from, and the town that I mentioned, like that's right in the middle of town. They've got this massive brick building that used to be the old mill, right? And if you go throughout New England, they're everywhere. Lots of waterways, so it was all water power, right? And they're kind of beautiful and and sad. There's sort of these exquisite relics of a bygone era, and they're so huge, nobody knows what to do with them, right? And so some of them they turn into condos. If you're close enough to Boston or something like that, they'll turn into like a luxury condo thing. But lots of them are just empty and derelict. And of course, this is true of all these manufacturing facilities throughout the industrial Midwest as well. And I sometimes will play a game. I'm just driving around like it's like maybe it's the fall and it's pretty foliage, and I mean these beautiful little New England villages, and I'm like that used to be full of hundreds or thousands of people going in and out every day, and it's just sitting there empty. And I'm imagining like I settle down in New England and I run for mayor. This is just we're just having fun here. And I'm like, and I'm gonna revitalize. What we're gonna find something to do with this building, and I cannot think of anything, right? Even something like, well, let's start making iPhones here instead. Like, if you know anything about how an iPhone is made, you realize just how completely unrealistic that is, right? And then AI, well, what, what are we going to be doing, right? Like, and I keep waiting for this whole new industry is going to emerge. And as I said earlier, I think it's like, well, once AI has written all the copy, nobody's going to read the copy anymore. And as soon as AI has written all the songs, nobody's going to listen to the songs anymore. As soon as AI has written all the movies, like, well, a computer wrote that. I'm not going to watch that, right? Like I mean, so
What
so
in
that go ahead.
what then is the uniting bond? What's the uniting mythology of Americanism in that case?
The optimistic person in me says that we actually do have a there is something profoundly American about America. Like we actually do have a founding myth that underneath everything we still believe. I loved Sam Tiedemann's just a masterful summary of kind of American civil religion, right? I might emphasize more of the cultural mythology, but it's the same idea, right? Um, I'm hopeful that we do have the resources, we do have the space and land, we are a resilient and entrepreneurial uh, culture, right?
Toll. Yeah.
That one of the things we might do is actually say, you know what, we're going to go this direction instead. Find use technology in ways that make sense, that enable a pro-social, pro-human kind of way of being in the world. But actually, I'm going to go learn to make like really, really, really high quality furniture, like beautiful, beautiful furniture. I'm going to learn how to make things and build things. And I'm going to use the technologies available to do that. And as long as I can make a living and maybe a few of my friends or my family, that may be enough for me. Maybe I don't need to make a killing in the stock market or get an IPO or whatever, right? Like my intuition is, and this is where I can sound a little Kingsnorth-ish, is that something is going to happen and we're going to all wake up as if from some kind of fever dream and say, what on earth did we do? And the good news is we have the technology to actually make a more pro-social future. That was the kind of point I was trying to make
Yeah.
about what we now call remote work was originally called telecommuting, right? It's like, well, we actually can do that, and you and I can talk. That's cool, right? There's all kinds of pro-social aspects to this that are kind of up to us to decide, and we don't have to just resign ourselves to our transhumanist fate.
Yeah, there's something much more interesting about talking to you versus, or talking to another friend from the TLC versus talking to an algorithm that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are talking to. And I use it, I do use it as a tool. Um, it's helpful but I use it in such a way that I can test whatever it says in relation. Like I can ask it for a pass and I can test that pass and I can recognize, oh, that's wrong at this point. It doesn't, yeah,
Well, what a lot of people are doing right now is using it to basically skip the homework, right? They're using it, this thing that the system has required me to do. I'm going to now, I found a shortcut. I can create that beautiful report or that whatever, right? Like, so to me, that's just an early stage, because eventually you just get to the point where why would you even do that? Like, what's the point, right? It's I'm the age where they started letting us bring our scientific calculators into high school math. Like, I remember when I was taking whatever, algebra, trigonometry, calculus, whatever, I was actually,
abacus.
yeah, like, and I had a teacher who was a romantic around about the slide rule, so he actually taught us how to use a slide rule, and I brought it home for my dad, like, and my dad just geeked out, like, his son was actually learning how to use a slide rule, right? It was just so ridiculous. Like, at that time the slide rule was kind of cheating, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
right. And once you sort of figured out how to use the formulas, you didn't have to memorize them anymore. Like, I was there when that was happening. It's like, well, which means that I still learned calculus like kind of the analog way, and then got to use a calculator for the tests and stuff, right? But that's not, I didn't go into mathematics, right? Like, that's not how the average kid is going to learn math anymore, because why would you bother, right? The calculator will do it. And so, to me, that's the worry, is like, if we create machines that can think and reason and do analysis and, even do algorithmic decision making and so forth, right? Like, what do we need us for? Right. And so, what is work? What is value? What do we end up? And so that's my point, is like, and maybe it's the point you
Well,
were trying to make about art and other things that are human, is that, well, maybe we're going to look for obvious signs that this was actually human created.
we have to pose the right question. That's so the way I see it is cultivating a sense of I go back to this word discernment, but like the right attention, whatever the right question is, the right level of attention at the right place at the right time. Because there are cases in life where it is perfectly fine doing the thing that takes 5 minutes instead of an hour and getting the B plus on and that B plus is great. But then there are other times where like it has to be perfect. You have one chance to get it right, and it has to be perfect.
Well, then you probably actually really want the AI. Like, you're build that bridge. You probably want. I'm not sure that's the point you were making.
Yeah.
It's like, do you, now that there are surgical robotic arms, do you really want the hungover surgeon doing it by hand? Like, maybe not, right? Um, yeah, these are. It, well, one thing you learned tonight is I have all kinds of thoughts and opinions about all kinds of things other than theology. So usually when I participate around here, I
Well,
try to find my footing and try to make a contribution. But you get into areas like this, well, I got all kinds of thoughts.
I read an article, and this could be a temporary blip. You know, that what I'm saying could be temporary. But I read an article saying that because I remember hearing maybe 5, 10 years ago, the first job in medicine that's going to be fully automated is radiologist. You're not going to
Yeah,
need
yeah,
radiologist.
hasn't happened
And
yet.
the article that I read is that there is a greater demand for radiologists now than there's ever been.
Which
And
might be
yeah.
because everybody went to other fields. But yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I still think though I still think that is ultimately a true statement, that
mhm.
the at least what we used to think of as a radiologist will be a vanishing thing. Maybe, now we can do much more sophisticated imagery. Maybe there's just more to review. And so maybe there, the level of expertise and what that person is doing now will be different than 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, so I get the point, and
Mhm.
I'm conceding the point. My point is not. Remember, my main thesis is that this is going to dramatically advantage high agency people.
Mhm.
That's my thesis, right?
Mhm.
So it's not like nobody's going to benefit. My worry is a lot of people, just like the guy who lived in Dayton, Ohio, back in 2000, with a nice four square and a bass boat in the driveway, and maybe a little cabin up in the Upper Peninsula, and maybe his wife works part time down at the dental office, and he's living like a king by any historical standards. He's got a high school diploma, but he's got a good job at the plant, and the whole world is coming for him. And there's nowhere but down for him, right? When you open up NAFTA and everything else, right?
Mhm.
And of course, that ends up creating a whole political movement. And so that's my point. My point is this is going to be highly, highly disruptive. And I'm just having a hard time imagining what people are going to do to kind of earn their place in the village, in my mythical village.
I think it goes to bringing up the next generation. But then what are the things? And I think it's virtue, discernment, curiosity. Yeah. We've taken virtue out of the schools.
But what
I
but what do you do for
Mhm.
work, right? What do you do
Do for time.
to
Mhm.
well, not not so
Well,
much just keeping yourself busy.
yeah.
I mean, like, to actually feel like you're contributing, and
Mhm.
to be perceived as to be
Contribute.
contributing.
Well, let's see how far AI and robotics get with the opposable thumb with this. Because this is the other, in addition to our brains, this is the other miracle of nature that robotics hasn't yet caught up with 4 billion years of evolution. Hasn't happened. So
Yeah, good point.
that fine woodworking or whatever, the Robin Williams Bicentennial Man, we're not there yet with the clockmaker. So I really like your idea of the Geppetto in the workshop. I think it's I think those fine arts. The thing is, the more we've retreated into the virtual, the more the physical aesthetic has suffered. And if I think to like when the visual aesthetics of our cities, towns were the most beautiful, it was Gilded Age. It was at that high, it was like Titanic level. Ironically, I think Titanic was the high water mark of like techno optimism. And past that point, we sort of retreated into individualism. Like Titanic was like the ship of dreams, we're sailing into the sunset, we're gonna get it all. And like it's basically, men building Babel, but in terms of a ship that's moving us over the waters of chaos. And it's like, we don't need God. God's not gonna threaten us. But this ship cannot sink. She's made of iron, sir. I assure
They,
you, she will sink.
yeah, they really shouldn't have said that. That just set them up for failure. The unsinkable. Did they actually say that? Because just like, my goodness. But it kind of reminds me of the techno utopianism that I see a lot, on the AI thing. It's like I just keep waiting for. Well, you sound really confident, but whenever someone says, "Well, yeah, but what are the new industries that are going to emerge as a result of this?" That look, and there's just a lot of hand waving around it.
I would be interested in seeing if the AI actually creates new patents, useful inventions. Once I start seeing that, because the way I'm envisioning human discovery, it's like you have a center and you have a web, whatever the web of things that can be invented is. And there are probably some puzzle pieces missing from the outskirts of that web that for whatever reason the person who was supposed to discover that died and
Yeah,
the AI might be able to fill in that puzzle piece like, oh, you're missing this part of this equation and that leads to this. But
for
I
sure. In like medical research, for example, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, but the stuff on the outskirts that's like actually pushing the boundaries because its entire knowledge base is only based on things that have been absorbed by humankind thus so far in terms of its capacity to actually I don't know, posit a question. Posit Is it necessary to posit the question that's outside of human imagination as it currently sits today? And that's what like the true epiphany, I think that's what's missing from it. It can't imagine beyond the realm of the things that have already been collectively imagined.
Well, if it, for example, found a way to flip the magnet back over from young men and young women drifting apart to once again finding joy in each other, if it knit together communities, if it made life seem enchanted and magical and worthwhile, if it, I mean, there's a lot of problems. If it could solve those problems, then that'd be great. It just seems to be actually likely to dramatically
Autistic at those problems.
exacerbate those
Yeah.
problems, right? I mean, as you know, this is my core concern is that I started noticing this back in the 90s that the men and women left to their own devices, just optimizing on what they perceive to be in their best interest in the moment, were inevitably going to drift apart because of a misalignment of timing and interest, right? And that a lot of social norms were designed to kind of keep nudging them back together to for a pro-social future, right? And that market clearing problem, that misalignment problem, um, has led to just dramatic dislocation and loneliness and misery and right families aren't being formed, all the things, right?
Can I
uh,
throw, well,
sure.
finish this,
No,
but
no, 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 no.
I want
You
to
know
throw
me.
my most radical idea at you.
You know me. I can go on about this, so
Yeah,
don't let
yeah.
me.
Okay. I remember, so someone, let me actually, I'm going to go to my notes on this because I want to get this right. Because I had a specific vision in mind for this part of the conversation with you. Because inevitably I knew it would come up. And
I've waited long enough, Neal.
um, there's a person close to me in my life that uh, met his first girlfriend while aboard a cruise ship. And it was a combination, and this person was in his like mid-teens, I think, but it was a combination of a controlled space, like an enclosed space where there's no other distractions, where you're forced to just interact and do stuff together. And men and boys and girls just running around the ship rampant and in freedom and basically in an enclosed space where that's forced. And I was thinking to myself, I'm fascinated by Israel in this because Israel seems to be the only uh, let's say first world country that, and even in the poorest regions of the world, birth rates are plummeting as women are educated, birth rates plummet. That's the correlating factor. And there are places in the world that still have a higher birth rate than Israel, but no other country has done better than Israel at sustaining it. Now that it's possible that could be changing, but to my knowledge, it's still holding up there. And and then I was thinking about South Korea, which is the exact opposite. South Korea's birth rate is I think zero point 0.7
Point six or
children
seven.
per.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah.
Uh, so they're the canary in the coal mine to see where that goes in the future. Um, and there's something that occurred to me, all of a sudden this light bulb went off, and so I did some searching because both Israel and South Korea have mandatory military service. They both have mandatory military service. South Korea is post Korean War, and and so I looked it up, and then I asked. I think I did it on Grok to start, but for South Korea, is mandatory military service required for both men and women? No, it's just required for men. And I said, for Israel, is mandatory military service required for both men and women? And they said the answer to that is yes, but there are a lot of exceptions. There's a lot of exceptions for depending on your, I guess, religion. Like for
Orthodox, for
there's
example. Yeah.
there's a lot of tension right now because there's an increasing amount of the populace that are the Hasidic Jews that I think are trying to don't want to be part of the military service, but since they're an increasingly large part of, but anyway, and so both men and women are required to, generally speaking, required to participate in mandatory military service at, I think it's around it. I don't know the exact, so I apologize if I'm messing this up. I really, but okay. So you have a space where you have both men and women around age 18. It's a controlled space. They're there with a common purpose, common goal, and they're building skills together. They're working together. And then it's like, and then the question is, okay, if they're married and they have a child while they're in the military service, does the man get an exemption from military service for having a child? The answer is no. Does the woman get an exemption from military service if she has a child? And the answer is yes. And so I was, I'm very curious about if you have some sort of, and so college used to be this, right? So back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, I mean, PV Cave talks about this in relation to becoming a pastor. Like if you didn't leave college married, you were doing something wrong, or like getting married, you were doing something wrong, you know? And and we sort of put the cart before the horse, I think, in terms of like solid career independence before the children. And I was thinking about economic incentives, and it's like if the economic incentives are in place and the arena is in place that requires that interaction in a controlled way, in a constructive way toward a common goal like defense. So this is one of my more radical. It's probably wrong. Like that's probably not the reason why Israel has maintained their birth rates. It's probably more to do with the emphasis on a common religion, a common
Thick,
heritage,
thick
and
culture.
also the
Yeah,
culture, and then also being surrounded by enemies and being like, hey, we're all in this together, and we've got threats, and having a yeah,
yeah.
just a common threat.
Well, your zombie apocalypse, massive economic collapse would definitely have men and women seeing more value in each other, if nothing else. As terrible a thing as that would be, it might have at least that redemptive potential. Because yeah, if you're fighting for survival, you are more likely to lean into kin and clan and just all the things, right? Israel's such a special case, and I've never visited or lived there. I have so little to say about that. I my if I'm where my optimism comes from. I mean, your point about the cruise ship or about just like I think this would be true for church, for example. I mean, that is a container. A lot of people used to meet their partners at work or at school. Same thing. We problematized a lot of that. Um, Word used advisedly. So if there's an optimistic future, it would be something like we and I by the way, I think this is already happening. The real civil religion that is massively growing is called the SEC. Um, you know,
College football?
like just watch those games, man. Like it's all there, all the liturgy, all of the everything, right? The whole
Everything I
thing.
hear about Gen Z is that they care less about sports than previous generations, and that's only going down.
Well, ask Kale. He talked about a lot of the students he has up there in the leafy Northeast. How many of them they know where they're supposed to want to go to school? All the elite universities, but a lot of them want to come to Southern schools and have that whole experience. So there it is on television. You're seeing the whole thing, right? All the pretty girls and the athletic guys, and all the fanfare. I'm somewhat tongue in cheek here, but I'm my point is that you might see the early stirrings of a kind of um, young men and women finding their way back to each other and not being so grim and joyless. you know, college sounds a lot more fun if you can, join a sorority or a fraternity and have a good time and not be in whatever at Williams College walking around looking glum and grim all the time because you're not doing your part to save the world yet. So you know my sense is that, and by the way, I would include myself, and as I have said in our marriage crisis conversations, to some extent, I think even I'm a cautionary tale. in terms of just kind of optimizing on the life that I wanted to live and sort of foregrounding my autonomy. And it may mean that I won't be able to have a family, right? Because I may have run out of time. And this is true of so many, right? And the younger generation is going to watch us and they're going to learn. They're going to take notes. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if you see and I think it's Jordan Peterson that says, have you ever won an argument with your wife or some version of that, right? Anybody who's married knows why that's funny. Because it's like there's no winning arguments with your spouse, right? Like even if you think you won, trust me, you didn't win, right? And what does winning actually look like? It's like, a week later, all of a sudden, that's the new reality. And like, oh, wait a minute. Like, actually, I won that one. Like,
But it had to play itself out over time versus in
totally.
the moment.
It's, men, we will have the battle. There'll be a victor will be, declared. There'll be some sort of ritual, humiliating the loser, cross swords, battleships, cannons, whatever, right? We'll all agree who won and who lost, and then we'll get on with it. And then we'll be, friends again tomorrow, right? But that's not really how it works, uh, particularly, between the sexes, but it's not really how women operate either. And so you could see a scenario where a lot of women just quietly make the choice that they're going to defect, but without any big public announcements. They're going to start thinking about what they think is in their best interests for themselves, not what they're necessarily being taught
But
in
also if the
school.
jobs simply aren't there,
Also, yeah.
so if that's the new reality.
And to be clear, if there's anybody who's hearing this thinking like, there's my secret misogyny leaking out, like, no, I'm very happy to live in a world where we are benefiting from the talents and skills of women, and I'm married to an amazing woman who is doing more than her share in terms of bringing value to the world, and I'm proud of her and proud of it, and I enjoy it, right? So this is, but I do see the structural problems when we spend the first decade, 15 years of a young woman's life getting the credentials and the career and all that. I see the problem with family formation. So perhaps we normalize, re-entering a professional track a little later. Make it easy for women to do that. Let's do everything we can to support young mothers. Like, let's do some things to make it so it's not this Faustian bargain that so many women are forced to make right now.
That might be a good place to end, but you got any final
That's
words
good.
of wisdom? And
Well, yeah, we tried to have 10 conversations in one. Is basically what happened. But
yeah,
it
it
was
was a good lay of the land of some areas where I think we have commonalities and common interests, and
no,
I hope we
I
talk again.
yeah, likewise. I appreciate you reaching out. You noticed that, I try to keep up in some of these conversations that get a little esoteric or abstract for me. And I certainly have come to really love a lot of you guys around here and enjoy learn. I learn almost every time I engage with anybody around here. There's so many really smart people, lots of disproportionate knowledge that I benefit from. But this is an opportunity to talk about some of the things that I talk to my friends about a lot on just a normal day.
And I suspect that you've been able to be successful in the endeavors that you've pursued because you have that gentle humility combined with wisdom, where you're learning all the time, but you're applying the practices where you do have experience, where genuinely leads to good outcome, and we appreciate it. Like we need there's a few of you, but you're my favorite of the few of
No,
the yeah. Sorry,
that's
Rick
not.
Walker. Rick Walker's number two.
You're nice to say that. I appreciate
I don't know if Rick will watch this, but sorry, Rick. We got to
that.
talk again. All right. Well, thank you, Rod,
All
and
right,
it's been
Neal.
a joy, and we'll talk again. Hold on
Likewise.
for 1 second.